Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we will talk about punishment of slaves in ancient Rome. Stay tuned with us and don't skip any part of the video. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. Let's get started. Slavery was a common practice in ancient Rome, where it was a critical part of the economic, social, and political structures. Slaves were often treated as mere commodities rather than human beings and subjected to harsh treatment and punishment if they were perceived as disobedient. Overview of slavery in ancient Rome. A Roman slave's contribution to the empire's economy was crucial to its survival, but its personal life wasn't glamorous. Wealthy aristocrats might lavish their slaves with food and utilities. Poor laborers were literally worked to death. Many slaves in ancient Rome were captured in war, but others had been kidnapped. In Italy, they were sold into slavery at a slave market. A notice was wrapped around their necks with their naked bodies on display, for those with enough money to buy them. Their new owners owned them once they were sold, so they had to work for no money. Often a wealthy man could have 400 slaves at a time. Slavery in ancient Rome was a legal institution that allowed individuals to own other human beings as property. Slaves were typically acquired through wars or raids and were used for various labor-intensive tasks such as farming, mining, and construction. The number of slaves in Rome during the Republic and early Empire periods was estimated to be between 1 and 3 million. Slavery was seen as a natural and necessary part of society, and slave owners had complete control over their slaves, including the power to punish them. Most slaves in the 18th and 19th centuries were well educated, mainly the Greeks. They would be used to teach their owners' children. A slave girl would brush people's hair, make dresses for rich women, and cook for them. In other slave workers' homes, they made leather or silver items as well as pots and pans. It was the slaves in the mines who had the harshest lives. In Rome, the workers had to endure long hours of cramped, hot conditions underground. It was likewise unsafe for slaves, and accidents often resulted in their deaths. Farmers had slaves do the hardest labor, like digging and plowing on their farms. Romans sometimes used slaves as public servants. They developed roads, built buildings, and repaired aqueducts that supplied fresh water to Rome. Others worked for the city as tax collectors and clerks. Even though it would be dangerous for them and other slaves to run away, many did. Yet it was extremely difficult because they did not have anyone to help them, and many of them did not speak Latin. Spartacus was a famous Roman slave who succeeded in escaping and forming a group of rebels that defeated the Romans in battle. Spartacus's success did not last for long, as the army killed the slaves that survived the battle by stopping the slaves from joining Spartacus's army. In ancient Rome, slaves were commonplace. There were almost as many free men as slaves, so the Roman slaves' daily life varied greatly depending on what their masters commanded them to do. They were gladiators, prostitutes, potters, and countless others. A Roman slave's life was far from perfect. There were many times when it was more convenient than expected, but the probability of a slave having a difficult life was always higher versus the probability of having a good life to sleep. They made up 25 to 40% of the city's total population. It's estimated that Rome had, around 1,000 years ago, around 300 to 350,000 slaves out of approximately 900,000 total inhabitants. Some places, including Pergamum on the west coast of present-day Turkey, have slave populations as high as 40,000 or one-third of the city's total population. Some have estimated that approximately 1/6 of the population was enslaved during the peak of the empire in the mid-2nd century AD. Slaves used to be taken simply based on need or want in ancient times, and they were taken regardless of ethnicity or territory. Wherever there were Roman victories, there would be new slaves. Since the majority were captured by the result of Roman wars, it's not apparent that the Romans preferred slavery or made any exceptions for it based on racial or national origin. Only the fact that someone was a Roman was of importance to the Romans. By the mid-19th century, citizenship was exclusively linked to racial identity, and ethnic group affiliation didn't play a role at first. They were drawn mainly from the tribes of Italy, where they spread to Carthage, Greece, Macedonia, Gaul, and other eastern provinces with little regard for their origin. Forms of punishment. Slaves who were perceived as disobedient or rebellious could be subjected to a range of punishments. These punishments varied in severity and often depended on the type of offense committed. Here are some of the most common forms of punishment inflicted on slaves in ancient Rome. Number 1. Execution. Slaves who were convicted of particularly serious offenses such as murder or rebellion could be executed. The most common method of execution was beheading, although some slaves were also crucified or thrown to wild animals in the arena. The purpose of execution was not only to punish the slave, but also to send a message to other slaves that rebellion or disobedience would not be tolerated. Number 2. Crucifixion. Crucifixion was a severe form of punishment that was reserved for the most serious offenses, such as rebellion or murder. It involved nailing the slave to a wooden cross and leaving them to die. The purpose of crucifixion was not only to punish the slave, but also to send a message to other slaves that rebellion or disobedience would not be tolerated. Number 3. Flogging. Flogging was one of the most common forms of punishment inflicted on slaves in ancient Rome. It involved the use of a whip or a rod to inflict physical pain on the slave's body. The severity of the flogging depended on the offense committed, with more serious offenses being punished by more severe floggings. Slaves could be whipped on their bare backs or buttocks, and the number of lashes varied but could be up to 100 or more. The purpose of flogging was to inflict physical pain on the slave and serve as a deterrent to other slaves. Number 4. Forced labor. Forced labor was a common form of punishment that involved making the slave perform particularly challenging or unpleasant tasks. These tasks could include carrying heavy loads, working in dangerous conditions, or performing work that was particularly challenging or unpleasant. Forced labor was a way for owners to punish their slaves while still getting work done. Number 5. Imprisonment. Slaves who were perceived as particularly troublesome or dangerous could be imprisoned. The conditions in these prisons were often harsh, with slaves being kept in cramped and unsanitary conditions. Imprisonment was used as a way to isolate troublesome slaves and prevent them from causing further problems. Number 6. Branding. Another common form of punishment was branding. This involved burning a mark onto the slave's body, typically on their forehead or cheek, to indicate that they were a slave and to serve as a permanent reminder of their status. The brand was often in the shape of the owner's initials or a symbol that represented the owner's household. Branding was a way for owners to assert their ownership over their slaves and deter them from running away or committing other offenses. In conclusion, slavery was a pervasive institution in ancient Rome, and slaves were often subjected to harsh treatment and punishment. That was all for today's video. Tell us your views in the comments section. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it informative and interesting. If you enjoyed this content, don't miss out on any of our new content. Please consider subscribing to our channel for more videos like this. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with your friends and family.